So, I would like to talk about one of the really basic practice teachings in our Vipassana uh, tradition. And in general, the teachings we give tend to be practice teachings. They're teachings that really focus on how to support people to practice mindfulness. That makes the most sense on retreats, and where that's really the focus. But that retreat focus is so central to us that sometimes that spills over. And it's one of the primary things we're doing is giving practice instructions that are relevant for meditation, and then indirectly sometimes, or sometimes directly, we talk about how it applies to everyday life. But these practice instructions that are coming out of the teachings of the Buddha, sometimes it's amazing how modern they seem. It's like, wow, this fits just into our world just as well as it probably did 2,500 years ago. But that's a long time ago. And that's like the Bronze Ages. Come to IMC and get teachings from the Bronze Ages. I don't know if that would, give people kind of pause to come here. And so in recent years, I've been very fortunate to have some contact with some of the modern developments, especially here in the West, of new ways of understanding human maturation, human concerns. That's had a big impact on me. One of them is the developing field of chaplaincy, pastoral care. And there's a whole set of values or human needs that are seen in chaplaincy is that the chaplain meets with people. And that list is different than any list that I've ever seen in Buddhism. But they're speaking to fundamental things that are about being a human being. I sit on in a hospital ethics committee, and I'm inspired by how in the last probably 50 years, the field of medical ethics has really been grown and developed. And there's very clear ethical values that are held in hospitals these days. And it's so inspiring to go to this committee and hear doctors and nurses, medical staff, reflect on how to care for patients with these values. And some of those values also are not directly spoken about in Buddhism, and maybe even avoided. And then the other is modern psychology, where there's been the ideas of human development, the stages of human development, like Erik Erikson. I think he has 5 stages of human development, and some of those forms of psychology have positive states that are kind of the fulfillment of these different stages. And some of those also aren't touched on in Buddhist teachings. So that's interesting. So do we just stay in little Buddhist, little enclave and be content with that, or not? And I find it very enlivening and interesting to see the interaction between these different worlds. And sometimes I feel like I learn from them. Sometimes I feel like the Buddhist orientation casts a different perspective on other things are developing in the West, and it gives me pause or gives me kind of a different slant to understand them. And so from one of the things that fundamental to chaplaincy is the topic of meaning making, meaning and purpose. And many times when meaning has been ruptured in people's lives, even when it's unconscious, the meaning they assign to their life or have, when that gets broken, and often in chaplaincy situations where chaplains are needed, it's because something dramatic has happened that what gives people meaning in their life has been broken or ruptured and sometimes betrayed even. And so being able to respond and think about points of view from meaning and purpose. And it's seldom that a Buddhist teacher talks too much about the topic of meaning per se or purpose per se. And when I was a Zen student, it was almost taboo. because the teachers would say, someone asked, what's the meaning of life? And they would bark back, no meaning. and what's the purpose? No purpose. But what they didn't then follow up on usually was to explain that this teaching of no meaning and no purpose was within a larger context that had a lot of meaning and purpose. So you had to if you didn't understand the larger context of why they say that, it would be just confusing sometimes. And so there was meaning and purpose there, even though to say that. And in the world of ethics, one of the fundamental ethical principles there are autonomy and dignity. That everyone has autonomy and everyone has dignity. And that is a little bit hard sometimes to fit into for some people. If you've spent too much time listening to Buddhist teachers like me, and they've emphasized not self, realize not self. And suddenly autonomy and dignity seems like now we're back in the world of self. And how are these supposed to work together? And then in modern psychology, stages of development, there's the idea of maturation. And that exists in Buddhism, the idea of maturation. Sometimes it's called ripening, because they use metaphor from plants, fruit ripening to this process of spiritual maturation. And I love the idea of using the word maturation for how people develop in Buddhist practice, because some of the classic ideas of the stage of development are quantum leaps. And you make this big leap into a whole different way of being, that transformation. And then there's almost like a status difference between people who enter these different levels and people who don't. And it's a little bit arbitrary to make these absolute quantum ideas of leaping. And I think the idea of maturation, a slow and gradual process of developing and growing, is much more peaceful. It's much more socially polite. It's just much more allows us not to be so caught up in goals and being perfect or just attaining something. We want to just allow something to slowly grow and develop. And it might look like stages, like Erik Erikson has these 5 stages or phases of human development. But even there, I think it's a little bit problematic, because who wants to be identified as someone who never grew out of the first stage? When you're a little kid. And but if you see them, these things as being 5 different areas of maturation, and that's with different areas of where we need to develop. So the classic teaching I want to mention today is called the 5 faculties, 5 capacities that we have that can become strengths as we mature. And the usual way of describing these 5 in English is faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So I would like to present them in a different way today. I'd like to present them as confidence, freedom, love, wholeness, and meaning and purpose. So faith, I want to call confidence. Effort or energy or exertion, I'd like to call freedom. And mindfulness, I'd like to call love. And concentration, samadhi, I'd like to call wholeness. And wisdom, I'd like to call meaning and purpose. And I think that switching the words like that provide us a very different orientation to understand how profound these 5 faculties are, these 5 capacities we are. And how as they get developed and come into fulfillment, become strong, that they bring us these wonderful qualities. They bring us confidence. They bring us a sense of freedom. They bring us love. They bring us wholeness. And they bring us a meaning and purpose. Classically, these 5 are sometimes paired so that faith and wisdom are paired, and effort and samadhi are paired, And then mindfulness that doesn't need to be paired or balanced with anything else. It just stands for itself. So in this schema, I think it works where the confidence and meaning and purpose work together. If we have a clear sense of meaning, what is meaningful for your life and what purpose, then we can talk about having confidence for that meaning and purpose. If we have a clear sense of it, and then the pairing of freedom and wholeness, in my mind, it implies that we can't really talk about kind of a spiritual or really mature humanistic kind of freedom if we're not whole. There's a lot of emphasis in freedom, as many of you know, in the United States, that it's kind of selfish. It's kind of like, I should be free to do whatever I please, to be said politely. And so there's the freedom to shop, freedom to, we're doing all kinds of things. But what I'd like to propose is when it's selfish or self-centered freedom, it actually is not healthy for the person doing it because the person is not whole. If we have a sense of real wholeness that comes from samadhi, comes from the meditation practice, then we'll feel how we become divided in ourselves, fragmented, when it's selfish, the sense of freedom we have. But for freedom to come out of a sense of wholeness, where we don't fragment ourselves, provides much more meaning and purpose for the freedom we live. And then mindfulness, I relate to love. And partly because that's what I discovered in the years I practiced it, that it's hard sometimes to separate the kind of clear attention to something that is mindfulness from love. That somehow seeing clearly is an act of love. And as I often have said, this is represented by the experience of young children or adults who come and talk to me and say that as young children, they feel they were never seen. The parents ignored them or didn't overlook them, or the parents were too busy or too angry or too drunk or something. And so they felt like they never were seen and cared for. And not to be seen as a child is equivalent to not feeling loved. And it can be really detrimental. To be seen is a form of love. For adults, maybe the equivalent is to be listened to. That to be really heard is a way of being. To hear someone well is a way of loving someone. It's such a deep need we have to be heard and understood. And so mindfulness is that it fits into this capacity to see and to hear, and to do that for ourselves. To really be mindful here, clearly, is a way to have love for oneself, to bring love, to see the world through the eyes of mindfulness is a kind of love, is a kind of care for the world. So the first one, confidence paired with meaning and purpose, paired with wisdom, is that the idea of wisdom in Buddhism, early Buddhism, in the Bronze Ages, is that wisdom has to do with understanding that we have a capacity to not suffer. We have a capacity to not to do things, engage in activities that afflicts us, that diminishes us, that undermines our well-being, that drains us. And we have the capacity to do the opposite. We have the capacity to do the things that make us feel nourished, develop what's wholesome in us, develop a sense of well-being and goodness in us, rather than badness in us, rather than And that distinction is necessary in Buddhism for the ultimate purpose of Buddhism, which is to grow and mature in a way that brings us to the end of suffering, to dukkha. Brings us to the end of the emotional pain that we contribute to ourselves. There might still be emotional pain, but it's not something that we're contributing to. Our heart is not adding or suffering. Our heart is not divided. Our heart is not contracting. Our heart is not involved in activities which undermine us. And to be able to see this clearly, well enough, can give a tremendous amount of meaning and purpose to a life. There's meaning and purpose to come to the end of suffering. There's meaning and purpose to do the things that allow our life, our inner life, our heart, to thrive. And the Buddha used the word thrive, to come into a sense of abundance, come into a sense of fulfillment, to mature and grow and ripen, to become full. And so there's a very positive orientation to the capacity of human development in early Buddhism, that the guide for it, the whole approach to it, is very simple. It doesn't require any supernatural beliefs. It doesn't require any great metaphysical beliefs. It requires a heightened sensitivity to feel how our body, our hearts, our inner mind, our inner life prefers to be whole, prefers not to add pain and suffering to us, add stress to our system, prefers to be involved in those things which feel inspiring, feel good for us. And maybe that's not enough for some people to inspire some people, because they want really grand ideas, spiritual ideas, supernatural ideas, cosmic consciousness, great states of altered states of consciousness. That's the purpose. In some ways, Buddhism is a pretty humble religion, because its goal is simply only to end suffering. And so to have a sense of that possibility, and then to have confidence in that's meaningful, to have confidence in that as a purpose. Without the confidence that this is useful, then why practice? There has to be some confidence in that's the goal, that's the purpose, that's what's possible. And so those two go together. We're not talking about confidence in some abstract way. I don't have enough confidence, I'm supposed to be more confident. But I don't know what I'm supposed to be confident in. But this the wisdom provides guidance for where we can find our confidence, where we can develop our confidence. And as we practice, then not only we have confidence in the purpose, but we also now have confidence in our capacity to practice, our capacity to make a difference, to engage. And that comes into the second faculty, which is effort, or exertion, or application, and which I tie to wholeness. And so to apply ourselves in this practice, like to practice mindfulness, practice meditation, because the meaning and purpose was to not suffer, not to add stress, we apply that confidently to how we make effort in the practice. I've practiced, sat down to meditate with the idea that, I'm going to get really concentrated now. I'm going to really kind of blast away my, all my thoughts. And I'll just be like the Dharma, the Buddha's gift to my town, my city. And I get a badge that says, look at Gil, I'm a great blaster way of thoughts and can, just not be distracted, and it'll be great. I'll be praised by everyone. It's maybe exaggerating a little bit how I thought, but there's something like that certainly went on in my mind. But those kinds of thoughts added stress. And when something like that was going on in my meditation practice, it turned out it was actually very successful for me in terms of creating a headache. So, eventually I learned that it just doesn't work. This attitude I have about how to practice straining and pushing, or sometimes I was really trying to avoid something. Really, something was coming up in my meditation, some emotions, some unresolved emotions that I really needed to look at. But I didn't want to look at. And I would put up walls, I'd put up resistance, I'd tense up so I wouldn't have to feel it. And eventually I've learned that didn't work either. that what worked is to open. Because the resistance is another form of undermining myself, is another form of being divided, is not understanding the meaning of purpose is to open to everything so we can find a way to mature through it, not to avoid. So this idea of having a clear sense of meaning and purpose is a protection for the effort we make, so that we kind of always checking out, am I practicing in a way that feels good, that I enjoy, or seems right to me when I have to face what's difficult? And then wholeness, the idea that wholeness is we start discovering all the ways we live in a divided way, fragmented way, all the ways we're pushing things away, or we're over-prioritizing certain parts of ourselves so we're not present for the whole. If we have strong desires and ambition, we might miss the whole of who we are. If we have strong aversions and hates, we miss the whole of who we are, because we're so fixated and focused on an object of our desires, the object of our aversions, we don't see the fullness of who we are. And so it turns out if you don't, the fullness of who we are, the wholeness, the undivided, the unfragmented, that actually feels much more nourishing. It feels much more, this is the soil, the ground in which things can grow and mature. And that's part of the function of samadhi practice in Buddhism, is to create the conditions that lets who we are be all of who we are, be complete, warts and all, so that it can be fertile soil for something to grow and develop. It's fertile soil for something to wither away, which doesn't serve us. And then we come then to the middle, which is mindfulness, that needs no balance, because mindfulness is often seen as a form of wisdom. Not the wisdom that you would necessarily articulate through ideas of meaning and purpose, but the kind of wisdom that comes from having direct, immediate contact with our lived experience, here and now. The contact that feels that if you step on a nail, you would know you should not push down with your heel, because you start feeling it going in. Oh, better take it out. You get the message right away. And so with mindfulness, these messages come in, and the stronger the mindfulness is, the more subtle the messages are from the psychophysical system. This is good. This is not so good. This is nourishing. This is pleasant. This is enjoyable. This brings happiness and well-being. This doesn't bring happiness and well-being. It brings the opposite. But to really get quiet and still, to not override the experience with a lot of thoughts and ideas and expectations. And that ability to have that kind of mindfulness that is so sensitive to the caring of what supports us and what doesn't, maybe you start seeing it's a form of love. Because we have inside of us something inside here that wants to care for you. Something inside of you that wants the best in you, that wants to avoid harm. It's not so different than, taking your hand off the hot stove right away. Something inside of you knows to do that. They say that that instinct to not take your hand off the hot stove never makes it to the brain, or it responds before the signal goes to the brain. It's so basic in the whole nervous system that's even, the brain, the mind that we don't normally think of, doesn't have to even operate. Something very deep inside of us, built into our very structure of being a human being, I believe has something in it to want to care for us. There's love, and that I would like to call love. So the possibility, as we mature, as we develop in this practice, is to bring these 5 areas to fullness. It's possible to come into a fullness around confidence. It's possible to come into a fullness around a sense of freedom, a freedom to be able to act without restrictions, at least through our hearts, what our hearts are motivated to do, as part of our wholeness. A fulfillment in love and care and compassion. A fulfillment in terms of a sense of wholeness, being complete. And now that I'm getting to be old, I'm 70 now, so some people consider it on the edge, approaching it. Depends how old you are, what you think 70 is. I'm approaching. When I was 20, I would have looked, that's old. So it changes. But it is an age where I begin thinking about, the end of life and, what my life has been like. And I feel kind of a certain satisfaction and feel like I've had a good life, and that feels full, that's felt full. There's a sense of wholeness in it. So that's a nice thing to come to. And but it's not enough to rest on that, because the system that I have still wants to practice. It's a constant coming into wholeness, coming into freedom, a constant kind of reference point to what's meaningful and purposeful. So maturing into wholeness is always a process. And then a fulfillment, coming into completion, a fulfillment or a maturity into a real sense of meaning and purpose. So that's kind of at the root. We're rooted in it. We're dedicated to it. It informs us. Yes, the purpose. There's a real purpose that I want to stand in and be part of that's different than going on Netflix or shopping on Amazon. Different than what a lot of people tend to do, fill their time with. But what if that meaning and purpose is like, that's what has most meaning for you, is what you fill your time with. And that's one of the things this practice can be part of. Some people feel like this gives them life the most meaning, most purpose. And it's not selfish, because in this system, in this meaning and purpose, built into this psychophysical system, in the love of it all and the care of it all, is a love and care for others and for the world. It can't be any different, because our own well-being is intimately connected to our connectivity to others. And if we're living in the lived experience, we really know how to sense and feel and be present, to listen and to see others, so that our seeing and listening is an act of love. People's well-being is kind of like our own. So of course, there's going to be love in how we live our life. So these are the 5 areas that have become strong and develop. And this is my attempt to try to synthesize, bring together Bronze Age psychology with the concerns of pastoral care, medical ethics, and modern psychology. I hope that was okay to do. So, confidence, freedom, love, wholeness, and meaning and purpose. Which of those is the strongest for you? Maybe none of them are strong, but which of them is strongest? And which is the weakest? Maybe they're all strong, but which is the strongest and which is the weakest in you? Which of the 5 you think can be improved, you could work on? Which is strong that can be applied to the others to bring them along? Confidence, freedom, love, wholeness, meaning and purpose. So, I've come to the end of what I wanted to say, and thank you for being here.